Good day, this is Life to Tape. We are recording the Vicki Barr Flight Stewardess series, The Clue of the Golden Coin. This is Chapter 10, The French Sand. Vicki had a restless night. This was unusual, because her healthy young body ordinarily enabled her to drop off into restful slumber almost as soon as she turned off the light. But last night she had been disturbed by a fitful dream of big old houses with murky rooms, ghostly pirate figures chasing her, and strange creatures lurking in wait for her around dark corners. The face of old Mr. Tyrrell floated through her dreams, frightened and pleading, and that of Raymond Duke with his leering white-toothed smile. Once she woke up and lay awake for a long time, thinking about the skull and crossbones and the threatening note. It couldn't be a prank. She was obviously getting close to something, and those involved were trying to scare her off. It could be nobody else but the masked pirate, Raymond Duke, and she was sure of it, Mr. Eaton Smith. Although she had surprised him in his home last night, it never crossed her mind that the mild-mannered travel agent might be mixed up in any kind of shady dealings. The note also implied that one of the three knew a great deal more about her than she had suspected, significantly where she was staying, in Tampa. She didn't think Duke or Eaton Smith could possibly have found out during the short time between the parade and her return with the curtains. Maybe the third man, then the pirate. She got up and dressed early, and was having orange juice and coffee by herself in the dining room when Louise and Nina came downstairs. Well, Nina laughed. We thought you were the late sleeper of the household. Was the excitement of last night too much for you? You don't know the half of it, Vicki thought to herself, but she smiled and said, I never had so much fun in my life. Then get ready for some more fun, Louise said. I believe you said your vacation starts today? Change your plans, Vicki told her. I didn't have a chance to mention it last night. I'm going to make one more trip, leave here tomorrow, return on Sunday. Then I have a whole week to soak up that Florida sun and get the tan Nina was teasing me about. Wonderful. That fits right into the plan. What plan is this? Vicki wanted to know. Louise's eyes twinkled. Daddy's promised us all a trip to Havana. He says that after the festival week, he needs a rest, and he's sure we do too. He had planned for us to fly over on Monday, so we can get there from here in a couple of hours. Then we'll be spending 2 or 3 days seeing the sights, shopping in their wonderful markets for laces, jewelry. They have the most wonderful combs and brooches, and things made of tortoise shells and coral, Nina interrupted excitedly. And taking in some shows at the nightclubs, Louise went on, and just having a high old time. That sounds perfectly wonderful, Vicki said enthusiastically. I've never been to Havana, and it's one place I've always wanted to visit. Then get yourself ready, Vicki. We'll have the time of our lives. After breakfast, Nina excused herself to go to the shop. She did have a job, she assured Vicki with a big smile, even though she managed to find plenty of time to enjoy herself. And since today and tomorrow are the last 2 days of the festival, we'll probably be swamped with tourist business. I have to go down to the welfare agency this morning, Louise said, getting up. Can you find plenty to do by yourself, Vicki? Don't worry about me, Vicki assured her. I have some shopping to do to get myself ready for Havana. After the girls departed, Vicki telephoned Mr. Quayle's office and made an appointment to see him in half an hour. In the taxi going to the airport, she fell to wondering about the identity of the third man, the masked pirate in the black coat. He had known that she was staying at the Curtains. The only people in Tampa who knew that were Mr. Quayle, the Federal Airlines personnel. Could the pirate be connected in some way to the airline? Well, she decided the riddle was too much for her now, but she was going to do her best to find the answer. When she entered the FBI investigator's office, he had now taken out more or less permanent headquarters in the airport's administration building until the gold coin case was solved. His secretary looked up. "I'm sorry, Miss Barr," she said. "You had no sooner hung up with I'm sorry, Miss Barr," she said. You had no sooner hung up than Mr. Quill called to say that he was detained. I told him about your call, and he asked if you could see him at 10. She looked at her watch. It's only 9:15 now. I'm terribly sorry if this holds you up." "No, indeed," Vicky smiled. "I'll go sit in the passenger lounge and watch the planes land and take off." The secretary grinned. Isn't that sort of business? Isn't that sort of a busy man's holiday, Miss Barr?" Vicky strode through the terminal waiting room, then decided to go outside and stand in the sun. She still couldn't get over the wonderful fragrance of the perfume-laden Floridan air. She couldn't seem to get enough of it. "I guess I'm just a hick from Illinois," she chided herself. As she sauntered along the sidewalk outside, breathing in refreshing lungfuls of the scented breeze, a familiar voice hailed her. "Hi there, Miss Vicky. Wait up." It was the irrepresentable Joey Watson, his usual broad grin splitting his freckled face. "What are you doing out of uniform? Aren't you flying today?" "I'm like an old-fashioned fire horse who can't resist the sound of alarm bells," Vicky smiled. "Only in my case, it's the sound of airplane motors." "I know what you mean," Joey said. "I feel the same way." He fell into a step beside her. Look, Steve is taking me up for lessons in a few minutes. Have you got time to come over and take a look at this ship? It's a peachy 2-engine Beech. Are you sure the field people won't mind?" "Of course not," Joey said. He opened the heavy wired gate that led onto the concrete apron. "Come on." Steve Miller was standing at the steps that led to the little cabin of his charter plane. He wore a light brown sack of garbline flying jacket. He wheeled around and smiled broadly when he saw Vicky approaching at Joey's side. "Oh, hello, Miss Barr," he said. "Do you come to take me up on that spin?" "Not this morning, Steve," Vicky said. "I've got things to do, but I may some other day real soon." "You do that, Vicky, Miss Barr," Steve said. "I will," Vicky promised. She looked at the trim little plane and nodded her head approvingly. "Nice airplane you have here." "We like it," Steve said, evidently pleased. It may seem like a lot of airplane to be giving our young friend his first flying lessons in, but she handles just like an automobile. "I know," Vicky said. "I've flown in Beeches before." "Good deal," Steve said. Just at that moment, a blond-haired young man strode toward them from a twin-engine Cessna that was parked farther up the concrete apron. He gave Steve a semi-military salute and said hello. "Come over here, Roy," Steve called out. "I want you to meet a friend of mine." The blond young pilot looked at Vicky as he said, "I've met your student, Steve. But this is Miss Vicki Barr," Steve told him. "Licensed pilot and federal airline hostess. Vicky, this is Roy Olson. He's a charter pilot out of St. Pete. He comes over the bay occasionally to take the bread out for our mouths." Roy Olson grinned. "Don't you believe it, Miss Barr. I just fly over here now and then to help relieve the load on the Tampa boys." He had an infectious grin, and Vicky liked him immediately. "I hate to break this up," Steve Miller said, "but if I'm going to give Joey a lesson before the warehouse bosses start yelling for him, we better take off." He climbed into the cabin and went forward to the cockpit. "Come on, kid," he said over his shoulder. "Strap yourself in, and don't touch that wheel until I tell you to." Joey touched his thumb to his forefinger in the time-honored airman salute to Vicky, and followed Steve into his plane. Vicki watched as they taxied out onto the runway and, getting the go-ahead from the traffic tower, took off. "I'll see you again, Mr. Olson," she said to the flyer from St. Petersburg. Again the young man grinned and said, "Good deal." Mr. Quayle, Vicki asked, after she had told the latest of her adventure, "Do you think I'm seeing Boogeyman in the closet?" John Quayle had listened attentively as Vicki recounted her experience of last night, the visit to Eaton Smith's house, her discovery of the violin case, her unexpected stumbling upon the tourist agent, Duke, and the third man whispering together in the darkened room. Duke's whispered, "Don't let her go yet. Keep her here." The masked man's flight, her chase after him, Duke's pursuit of her in the costume crowd, receiving the threatening note on her return home. No, Miss Vicki Barr," John Quayle said seriously as he puffed on his old pipe. "I don't think you're seeing Boogeyman at all. I think you're teaching me a valuable lesson that they forgot to include in the FBI training course. Never underestimate the feminine point of view." He blew a thick blue smoke ring that drifted lazily toward the ceiling, and started out with the cold, hard fact that a shipment of gold coins had been stolen in some mysterious way. You, on the other hand, started out with the warm human fact that an old man was unhappy, a young boy seemed headed for trouble. I concentrated on trying to find the thieves. You concentrated on trying to help the old man and the boy. He paused again and smiled. "Does this sound like a lecture?" "Why, no, sir," Vicki said politely. "Well, it should sound like one, because it is. A lecture to myself." He picked up the telephone. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I have to take a little closer look at a certain importer and a certain travel agent." Vicki got up from her chair. "And one thing," John Quayle said, "the next time you see something that doesn't feel right to your woman's intuition, come and tell me about it." Vicki took an airport bus back to Tampa and got off in Midtown. Her head was spinning as she tried to puzzle out the tangled events of the past week and put them together in some logical order. But the sun was too bright and the air was too sweet and clean from gloomy thoughts. Her mind leaped ahead from the fun she'd be having in Havana. She sauntered along the streets aimlessly, looking into the shop windows. She stopped in front of an art supply store and was casually examining some of the pictures that were on display when a familiar figure inside the shop caught her eye. It was the old violinist, Mr. Terrell. She entered the store just as the man was saying to the clerk in his quavering voice, "And 5 pounds of French sand, please." "I'm afraid you've almost bought us out of French sand these past few days, sir," the clerk said. "Not very much demand for it here, but we should have some left. I'll go see." He turned to go. Vicki looked around the store. Mr. Terrell seemed to be alone. This was her chance to talk with him. She walked up to the counter and said, "Why, hello, Mr. Terrell." At the sound of her voice, the old man turned, and a smile broke over his lined face. Why, it's Miss Barr. You were in such a hurry the last time we met that I didn't have much of an opportunity to say hello." She remembered the old man's frantic plea. "I have to talk to you." If he really did have something important to tell her, now was the time to draw it out. "Mr. Duke said that you were working for him. He seems like a pleasant man." At the mention of Duke's name, the old man's eyes again took on a frightened look. He nodded his head, and for a second his eyes fell. Yes. "Do you also work for Eaton Smith?" Vicki asked casually, as he had on the street of Ubar. The old man grasped her hand and stammered, "Miss Barr, I feel that you are my friend, the only friend I have." His eyes were pleading in his ashen face. At that moment, the clerk reappeared with Mr. Terrell's package. The old man fumbled nervously in his pocket to get the money to pay for it. So the old man really is in trouble, Vicki thought. But how could he possibly be connected to Duke and Eaton Smith and the man in the pirate cloak? "Mr. Terrell, did you leave a message in the plane that day for me, a travel folder?" "Yes, and you found it." For a second his eyes lost their frightened look. "Miss Barr, I need help. I have to talk to you." Then let's find a quiet place to talk, Vicki said soothingly. No, not now. He looked fervently out into the street. Mr. Duke is waiting for me, in his car down at the corner. The old man lowered his voice to a whisper. When do you fly again to New York, Miss Barr? Tomorrow, Vicki answered, surprised at this question. Tomorrow at 3:45. Federal Flight 17. I'll be on that plane, Miss Barr, Terrell's voice was so low that even standing beside him, Vicki could hardly make out the words. They won't stop me. I'll be on the plane. He turned quickly and went out the door. Well, that was chapter 11. The next episode will be chapter 12, The Disappearance. Good day, this is Life to Tape. We're recording Vicki Barr, The Flight Stewardess series, The Clue of the Golden Coin by Helen Wells. We are continuing on chapter 12, The Disappearance. Promptly at 3 o'clock, Vicki entered the airport terminal building. From a payphone, she had put in a call for Mr. Quill's office upstairs. He had asked her to report anything to him that didn't feel right to her. Her meeting with Mr. Tyrrell yesterday certainly qualified as not feeling right. She had tried to call him yesterday, but had been unable to reach him. But once again the FBI man wasn't in his office. His secretary thought he'd be back shortly. Vicki went to the reservations desk to look at the passenger list for Flight 17. There was his name, all right, Amos Tyrrell. So the old man had made it. Before this day was over, Vicki thought to herself she ought to have the answers to a lot of troubling questions. She looked around. The old man was nowhere in sight. Has Mr. Tyrrell checked in? She asked the clerk at the desk. The girl looked down her list. Why, yes, he was in over an hour ago to validate his ticket. She looked at her watch. About 1:30. Then he must be somewhere around, Vicki knew, possibly in the snack bar. She had plenty of time, so she sauntered toward the restaurant. There was no sign of the old man at the counter or at any of the tables, but Captain March was sitting on one end of the stools, hastily gulping a cup of coffee. Vicki, he said, you're just in time to do me a favor. I can't find my best pair of pigskin gloves, and I think I may have lost one of them somewhere in the terminal. I have to rush to the weather briefing, so be a good girl and see if you might be at Lost and Found. You'll know them by the Abercrombie label. Vicki walked across the big waiting room, casting her glance around for Mr. Tyrrell, but he was nowhere to be seen. At the Lost and Found desk, the boy in charge grinned when she asked about the captain's gloves. These were turned in Thursday, he said, reaching under the counter and coming up with a new pair of pigskin gloves. These the ones? She looked at the gloves. Vicki's eyes caught sight of an object lying on the lower shelf behind the boy. What's that? She asked sharply, pointing. That? The violin case. The boy turned and picked it up. One of the porters found this old fiddle about an hour ago. Is it yours, miss? Vicki looked at the worn leather case with the frayed handle and exposed metal of the clasp. It was Mr. Tyrrell's, no doubt of that. But it bore the fresh scratches, and there was a dent in the side as if someone had stepped on it. Where was it found? Vicki's voice took on a strident note as a dark wave of dread swept over her. Outside somewhere. The porter didn't say. Just where? Vicki turned and ran up the stairs to Mr. Quayle's office on the second floor. When she burst through the door, the secretary looked up and shook her head. He hasn't come back yet, Miss Barr, and I really don't know when he'll be in. Is there anything I can do for you? May I leave a note? Certainly. You'll find paper on the desk over there. Vicki hastily scribbled a message, telling the FBI investigator about her meeting with Amos Tyrrell yesterday, his checking in at the reservation desk, and her finding the battered violin case that appeared to show marks of a struggle. She folded the note and gave it to the secretary, then went down the stairs with a heavy heart. 20 minutes later, when the passenger boarded the plane, she looked in vain for Mr. Tyrrell among them, but when the last of them had come aboard, the ground crew had secured the door and wheeled away the loading ramp. He was still absent. Since finding the violin case in Lost and Found, Vicki had an awful feeling that he would not board the plane. That was chapter 12. The next chapter is chapter 13, Havana.